book Super Imperialism was all about how the United States, by establishing the dollar as international reserves, meant that when the United States runs a balance of payments deficit, which is almost entirely military, to support its 800 bases around the world, these dollars end up in foreign countries for spending for goods and services and payments to people and bribes to the government officials. And these dollars are turned over to the central banks for the local currency, which is what local suppliers want. And the central banks have a problem. What do we do with all of these dollars that are floating in? And central banks don't buy control of corporations. They don't buy private sector stocks and bonds because they're risky. Central banks buy U.S. Treasury bills. So all the money that is spent on the balance of payments deficit on military account and on American investors buying out Chinese stocks and Chinese companies, these dollars are all spent on U.S. Treasury bonds to fund the balance of payments deficit, but also at the same time to fund the domestic budget deficit. So the larger the U.S. balance of payments deficit is, the more it spends militarily and politically around the world, the more foreign central banks end up financing the domestic budget deficit, so that the United States Treasury doesn't have to borrow from U.S. Investors. It doesn't have to create money itself. More and more of the U.S. Domestic debt has been held by foreign central banks. Well, that means that foreign countries are in effect financing the costs of surrounding them with all of the military bases, enabling the United States to make military threats to back up in case you fail to follow the University of Chicago and IMF financialization programs, and they cannot conquer you intellectually. They will use the military lever to convince you to follow the IMF. So the question is, how do China, Russia, Iran, and other countries break free of dollarization, of this circular flow that is self-financing American military spending by forcing the costs onto dollar holders? Well, the answer, obviously, is not to use the dollar. Another reason not to use the dollar is to look at what the United States has done to Iran and other countries. The U.S. Threatens to isolate foreign banking systems that use the SWIFT bank clearing system, or to make penalties on other governments that will help invest in your countries. So to break free of American control of your economy, a control of your economy designed to force you to sell your most profitable industrial sectors to U.S. investors, to force you to invest in your country only by borrowing from the United States and giving U.S. investors a ripoff. You have to have a non-dollar currency. And the non-dollar currency alternative has to be large enough to have a critical mass that it can be used internationally. And I think that's why China, Russia, Iran, its allies are trying to create a currency area incorporating largely the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, so that you can denominate your foreign trade and foreign investment and government spending in your own currency, and break through not only of the U.S. dollar, but from the International Monetary Fund. The objective of U.S. monetary policy and International Monetary Fund would basically be, if you run a budget deficit, you would do something very different from the U.S. The U.S. runs a budget deficit by creating money. It never expects to repay its debt. But outside the United States, it says other countries must finance the deficit by selling off the whatever is in the public domain. Sell off your land, sell off your real estate, sell off your commanding heights, your infrastructure, your electric utilities, your raw materials. The ideal of the United States for what it would like China to be would be what it did to Russia after 1991. Essentially, they told Russia, you have to create back your domestic ruble issues by holding U.S. Treasury securities and borrowing from the U.S. Russia paid 100% interest per year to the United States in 1993, 1994, to U.S. investors for domestic spending. The fact is, Russia did not need any foreign exchange at all to pay domestic wages, to pay for domestic goods and services, but they're trying to force Russia to say any money you create, any domestic currency credit you create, you have to do it in U.S. dollars and pay interest to the United States for this privilege. There is no need for such a privilege. At the end of this road, the United States convinced Russia to sell off its raw materials, its nickel mines, its electric utilities, its oil reserves, and ultimately, as you know, it tried to pry Crimea away from Russia. If China would follow the U.S. plan, at a certain point, China will be asked, will you sell off Macau and Hong Kong as a U.S. military base? Will you sell your IT information technology to the United States? We think that it would be much better if China would divide itself into 3 or 4 countries. Or even more. First of all, separate the Xinjiang into a separate currency area, carve up China. This is the U.S. plan of divide and conquer, and it uses financial policy to do this. The U.S. has discovered that it does not have to militarily invade China. It does not have to conquer China. It does not have to use military weapons because it has the intellectual weapon of financialization, convincing you that you need to do this in order to have a balanced economy. So when China sends its students to the United States, when it sends especially its central bankers and financial planners to the United States, what they're told by the U.S. is, do as we say, not as we have done. The United States is not telling China or Russia or third world countries or Europe how to get rich in the way that it did, by protective tariffs, by creating its own money, by making other countries dependent on it. The United States does not want you to be independent and self-reliant. The United States wants China to follow a system where it's dependent on U.S. finance in order to get the funding to finance its own industry. It wants Chinese corporations to borrow from the United States and to sell its stock to U.S. investors, just like Khodorkovsky in Russia was trying to sell Yukos oil to Standard Oil and essentially turn Russia's investors over. The United States has convinced China that your tax system should be based on raising the cost of labor. The objective of the United States is to injure China, to make it a high-cost economy by imposing the value-added tax so that it will increase the cost of consumer goods here, and by taxing consumer goods with a value-added tax, you will have to pay your labor a high enough wage to pay the taxes on consumer goods. The United States could never pass such a tax domestically. There would be a revolution. The amazing thing is that there's no revolution in China, that quite frankly, you are gullible, and your government is gullible, and that you were accepting by asking the United States economists to draw up a plan for China. Their plan is not to make you independent, not to help you grow, except to the extent that your growth will be paid to U.S. investors and used to finance U.S. Military spending, the balance of payments deficit, all around the world, encircling you and trying to destabilize you in Sichuan, in the Uyghur areas in the West, to try to pry China apart. Look at what the United States has done in Russia. Look at what the International Monetary Fund in Europe has done to Greece and Latvia and the Baltic states as a dress rehearsal for what U.S. Diplomacy would like to do to you if it convinces you to follow the neoliberal U.S. Economic policy that's basically one of financialization and privatization. So to answer Paulo's question, de-dollarization is the alternative to privatization and financialization.